Hello everyone, welcome back to STEM Nerds. I'm Jason. In today's video, we need to talk about pH. In the last video, we discussed some basics of general chemistry. If you haven't seen that, check it out. The video's in the upper right-hand corner, but that one you really should watch before you watch this one here. But in today's video, like I said, we're going to be talking about pH. It's super important. pH stands for potential hydrogen. And basically what we're doing is we're measuring the acidity or the alkalinity of a solution. And so I want to give you some examples here of what that looks like in terms of the pH scale and the different types of chemicals that we see at these different pHs. So this is a pretty cool picture. A couple things I want to point out here is that the pH scale goes from 0 to 14. As the number gets lower, something is becoming more acidic. As the number gets higher, it's becoming more alkaline or basic. I like this particular picture because it shows you some of the things that are representative at different pHs. And so pH 0, really, really acidic. That would be battery acid, stomach acid in the pH, very low pH, lemon juice, very low pH, as is vinegar and tomatoes. Coffee has a low pH. That's why people will tell you, hey, if you drink a lot of coffee, or what's not on here, a lot of soft drinks also have a really low pH. That can actually erode the enamel of your teeth. And so you want to be a little bit more aware of your oral hygiene when you're drinking a lot of pop, drinking a lot of coffee, because that can do a number on your teeth. Water, pure water, has a pH of 7, and that's neutral. And so what we're doing with pH, and I'm going to show you more in detail in the next slide, but with pH, what we're measuring really, remember what I said, pH stands for potential hydrogen. And so in this particular case, we're measuring the amount of hydrogen ions relative to the amount of hydroxide ions, OHs. And so imagine if you've got water, H2O, and you split it. You have a positively charged hydrogen, and you have a negatively charged oxygen bound to a hydrogen. And so what we're doing there is we're measuring the concentrations of each. And I'm going to show you a picture of this in a second. But something we need to understand is that in living systems, in ecosystems, and especially inside of our human body, pH is highly regulated. It's what we call it's buffered. And so a buffer is a chemical that will help regulate pH. It's kind of like a pH sponge. It keeps a pH in a certain range. And so for the human body, human blood, for the most part, we're right around a pH of 7.2. The exceptions to that, on this particular picture, you can see the stomach acid is very acidic, and the female lower GU is also acidic. But for the most part, the rest of the body is right around a pH of 7.2. Now, a lot of people are used to seeing things like, okay, we've got acid, that's really dangerous, but we tend to overlook the fact that as you go really extreme on the other side to a really high pH, that can be pretty dangerous too. And so you've got things like ammonia and bleach and drain cleaner. And the reason why those things are so effective is because the pH is very, very high. All right, so now I want to take a look at this picture here because I think this does a better job even of showing us what it means when we're studying pH. Again, potential hydrogen. So again, nothing has changed. We've got 0, that's the low side, 14 is the high, so we go 0 through 14. But what I want to show you here is, again, we're dealing with the concentration of hydrogen ions, the H+, relative to the concentration of these OHs, the hydroxide ions, negatively charged. In the middle, at a pH of 7, the concentrations are equal. They're exactly the same. That's what we call a neutral pH. What I need you to understand is as the pH goes more acidic, so as we go to the left of the pH scale, let's focus on the hydrogen concentration. The hydrogen ion concentration, as we go more acidic, is actually getting larger. So when we say something is acidic, what we're really saying is the hydrogen ion concentration is increasing. At the same time, look at the OHs. They're going down. That concentration is decreasing. And the opposite is true when we go to the opposite side of the pH scale. So the bottom line is when we have pH, as the pH number is decreasing, the hydrogen ion concentration is increasing. As the pH goes up, it's the hydroxide ion concentration that is increasing. Now, the last thing I want to talk about that's super important is the way it's increasing. When we are dealing with pH, the way it's increasing or decreasing is logarithmic. And so every time we change that pH number, we're changing the concentration of the hydrogen or the hydroxide ions by a factor of 10. And so these changes are huge, and that is why pH is so heavily regulated inside of a living system. If we look at this, let's just say, as an example, we start at a pH of 7, and the pH decreases to 4. Okay, well, what is the increase in the hydrogen ion concentration. Well, every time that number changed, it changed by a factor of 10. And so we went from 7 to 6 to 5 to 4. So how many times did that change? Went from 7 to 6, 6 to 5, 5 to 4. So it changed 3 times, and each time it changed was by a factor of 10. And so to get the change in the concentration of hydrogen ions, it's 10 times 10 times 10. That's 1,000 times change. So it's really important to understand when we're looking at the change in pH and the impact that it's having. It's a logarithmic scale, and every time that number changes, we're changing the concentration of the hydrogen ions or the hydroxide ions by a factor of 10. And we multiply those 10s together to figure out the total change. Now in chemistry, they might make it a little bit more difficult because maybe you're going from an 8.4 to an 8.2, but in biology, usually in my classes, I'm asking students to look at the number, and if we go from 7 to 11 or 4 to 2, what is the change in the concentration? All right, so that was a short little lesson on pH, and hopefully what we understand, again, is we go from 0 to 14, the smaller that number is, the more acidic, the higher the number is, the more basic or alkaline. When we change that number, it is a logarithmic change, and the number is changing, the concentrations are changing by a factor of 10, and of course pH stands for potential hydrogen, and we're measuring the concentration of hydroxide ions relative to the hydrogen ions. Hopefully we also understand that living systems are highly buffered to keep a pH in a very narrow range, because when that doesn't happen, if a pH gets outside of a range, that can be very, very reactive. And something we even talk about in microbiology is we study microbes growing at different pH levels, and sometimes they just can't handle it, because when we have a pH that starts to get a little crazy, as we're going to see in the next video, proteins denature, macromolecules don't like that. But as always, thank you so much for being here. Have a great week, everyone.